Like if I said, everyone raise your hands if you're busy, everyone would raise their hand, right? It's the thing that we do, right? Busyness is something that is a way of life in America because everyone is working or has hobbies or has kids or pets or whatever it is that we do, we like to fill our time, right? And if I was honest with you, I would tell you that as busy as I am and as busy as I know many of us are, I tell our leadership team at Altar Church not to tell people that you're busy when they ask you for your personal time because people don't give you sympathy for that, right? Like everyone's busy. So if someone says, hey, can we have coffee? And you say, I'm kind of busy. Like it comes off as almost like an insult because everyone's busy, right? So instead you say, it will be in 2 months. Pick a day, that's what you say. Because everyone is busy. But the reality is, most of us are more than busy. We're beyond busy. And I'm talking about being worn down or worn out. Have you ever felt that way before? Everybody has felt worn down or worn out. Every single person. I remember 18 months ago, I was working a full-time job and I was working, obviously pastoring this church. I just had a newborn baby, which was our 7th child, and I was in graduate school, and it was too much. Like I had like a little meltdown. It was, it was a bit much, so I had to scale things back. And I think everyone here has probably had something similar happen in their life at one time or another. You just felt worn out and too busy. And then when that happens, you can count on adding on some depression because this is what generally comes when we're feeling busy or worn down or wore out. And depression is a very common affliction in America. Most of us at one time or another, seasonal depression is a really big deal, especially in places like Northeast Ohio. And it looks different for different people. For me, I don't get sad or feel bad for myself. I lose motivation. I start sleeping too much. I lose positivity and energy, and I don't want to do anything. When this happens, what happens to your attitude? Turns bad, right? When your attitude is bad, everything's broken. You say, I can't stand anyone. I hate people. Everyone is out to get me. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we've been in this place, right? Bad attitude, we've all been there. And so when we're in this place of busyness and feeling worn down and depressed and it's impacting our attitude, what does this do with our intimacy with God? Does it make us feel closer to God or further away from God? Further away from God. You feel further away from God because more often than not, we're not seeing him work in the way that we want him to. We don't experience him doing the things that we'd normally expect him to do. And it leaves us wondering if he's real and present. It leaves us wondering if he's interested in us or not, or if he's forgotten about us, because we don't see his presence in the places that we used to. Have you been here before? I think probably everyone can say yes, and I have too. And it's likely that as you come to church this morning, you are in one of two places. You're either in the middle of something like this, or you've come through it, but are preparing to face it again because it's going to happen again at some point in your life. I can promise you that. This is one of the reasons that I love the Bible so much. It gives us all these real stories about really complicated people who live complicated lives and have this really complicated relationship with God, and it shows God's persistence and his love for them and his patience for them. So it helps us identify with them and say, hey, I've been there too. I know what that's like. I've been there, and I can see how God was persistent and God still loved that man or that woman, and so I can relate. And so for people who felt worn down, people who felt busy and depressed and full of attitude and have felt at a distance with God, there is this man, this prophet called Elijah. Elijah was a prophet who lived 850 years before Jesus, And prophets were similar to pastors. Elijah was trying to show people the way to God. He was trying to get the nation of Israel restored back to a relationship with God. He was trying to motivate them to love and to worship God. And unfortunately, in the climate where Elijah was during his time, there was a really terrible, evil rulership in Israel. King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. And King Ahab and Jezebel hated Elijah, and they hated the prophets, and they hated God, and they didn't call it church then, but they hated the worship of God. They couldn't stand it. And so they killed all the prophets in Israel because they wanted to eradicate the worship of God. And they said through a message, Elijah, you're next. And Elijah knew that they weren't playing around, okay? And so we read in 1 Kings 19 how he felt about this. It says Elijah was afraid, and he ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, and this is in Israel, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. Now Elijah, he was kind of freaked out. You know, he's scared because he's afraid that he's gonna die. No one wants to die, right? No one, you know, most people, you just don't want to die. You want to run away from death, okay? And so that's what he does. He travels to the city, Beersheba, and he leaves his attendant in the city, and he goes out into the desert by himself. He's just wandering around the desert, and it says he came to a broom bush. He sat down under it, and he prayed that he might die. Man, he's not doing well. Elijah needs a hug. I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. And Elijah, he comes to this bush, and we should see this bush is sort of like a shade tree, and he falls asleep under this tree, and he's praying for death. He's praying for death. He wants God to take his life. I've had enough. I've been busy. I've been worn down. I'm depressed. My attitude is a wreck. Take my life, because I'd rather die, God, than struggle like this anymore. In fact, I'm no better than my ancestors. And what he means by this, what he's saying is that just like the prophets before me, my ancestors, God, who you called out to change this nation, just like they were unsuccessful and they failed to turn the hearts of the people, so am I unsuccessful. I'm not able to do it either, God. And so I just want you to take my life. I'm done with this. I can't keep doing it. Now, I don't want to give too much away in the story here. I want you to study the life of Elijah on your own. But Elijah is the most effective prophet in history, okay? He's one of the most godly men to ever walk the face of the earth. And so this man who we would consider as wildly successful, someone who's obedient to God, someone who followed God, someone who God blessed, is in this place of such brokenness that he can't see God working in his life anymore. He can't look back and say, here's God, or there's God, or here's what he's doing. And what's happened is he's lost that sense of God's goodness and presence. Now, I will tell you that Elijah, he's going to get on the other side of this. He will. But not until he understands that God was bigger and at the same time more present than he could have ever understood. And Elijah has to learn to listen to God and to understand that God was his advocate, his defender, his refiner. And that the joy and rest and deliverance and hope that he was craving was in hearing the voice of God. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to study these principles and hopefully experience God in that same way throughout this series. We want to talk about hearing his voice, understanding what it means to say that he dwells inside of us and that he's our advocate and our defender and our refiner. In order to do this, we're going to have to commit to three things. All of us, be here, be willing, be ready be here to experience the word. There is power in Christian community. It's in this place where we come to experience the word of God, build into each other, and at the same time, God builds into us. So be here. Be willing. Be willing to hear what God has to say as he communicates to you in your heart. Be willing to hear it and then be ready to apply it. Be ready to apply it in your life, in the circle of friends that you have, in the circle of family that you have. Be ready to live out that calling. And since you're all here and you're willing and you're ready, let's find out together what happens to Elijah. The man cold is still a thing, so you have to give me a little grace here with water. Is that okay? We're okay with that? Are you okay? Is it okay? Is it okay? The water drink is always the awkward thing. Like, what do you do? What do you say when you have to drink some water? Do you talk or do you not say anything? Raise your hand if you should say something. Okay, I shouldn't say anything. So next time I'm just going to have a drink of water and not give a commentary on it. So I'm learning stuff every day. So Elijah is in this state of depression, and he's feeling defeated, and he's feeling hopeless, and this goes on for about 6 weeks, 40 days. And he's wandering around the desert, and he finds himself in front of this mountain at a foot, or rather, he finds himself in this cave at the foot of a mountain. He's sleeping in a cave. Elijah is not doing better. He's not doing well. God hasn't killed him yet like he would hope, or that he was praying, so he's just sort of walking around and sleeping. It says the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah replies, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars, and they've put your prophets to death with the sword, and I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too, God. So Elijah's saying, God, I've tried to serve you well. I've listened to you, and I've done what you've told me to do. I've trusted you. I've worshiped you. And I've taken that love, and I've taken that worship and obedience, and I've tried to point other people back to you. I've tried to turn their attention to you, but they're tearing down the churches. They're killing prophets with the sword, and they have no interest in you, God. And so clearly, I am a failure. And that's why I'm walking around in the desert and hiding in caves and sleeping, and I want to die because I'm a failure. Now, there are people in here who are business leaders or managers or in charge of projects or people or little humans, and so you know what it feels like to have the burden of responsibility. You know what it feels like when things go bad and you have that pressure of performance, or you make mistakes, or people aren't doing what they're supposed to, and that burden, it's I don't want to say it's the next level, but it's just at least different when you're a prophet or a pastor, because you have this sense of responsibility for people's holistic health, their spiritual health. You have this sense of responsibility for their soul, right? And so Elijah has been tasked by God to build churches, essentially, and restore people back to God, and they're tearing down churches, and they're killing people who love God, and so Elijah feels like a failure. And one of the reasons he's hiding is because he's the last one left. At least that's what he thinks. He thinks he's the last one left. God, I'm the only one. I'm the only prophet left. And so if King Ahab is successful in killing Elijah, then Elijah feels like God's work on planet Earth is done. It'll somehow come to an end. So you can see this heaviness and this worry. Even if you can identify with being a prophet, at least you can relate to the feeling of being depressed and broken down, because at one time or another, every single one of us have felt like we have no freaking idea how we're going to move forward, right? We've been there. We know what it means to not know the way out. This is where Elijah's at. He wants to die. He wants to quit. But here's what God says. God says, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord. For the Lord is about to pass by. Now, Elijah wants to die. But God knows what Elijah needs is to be reminded of God, of who God is. And so God understands that Elijah has to experience his full power and presence, the full manifest presence of God in all of his glory. That's what Elijah needs, because in the presence and the power of God, Elijah is going to remember his why. Everyone has a why, right? Everyone's got a why. Why do I not go on vacations and work extra shifts? Well, it's because of my kids. They're my why. Why do I study so hard and show up at this college and save up for tuition and sacrifice all these things that I do? It's because education and a career is my why. Why do I show up at 9:30 every Sunday and get the projectors out and get the pastor's misspelled sermon notes and put the things in? And that's Jared back there. His why is because he believes in the mission. Why does someone spend time on music and learning how to play music so they can worship in front of people and bring people to a space of worship? It's because they believe in the mission. The mission is their why. The calling is their why. Elijah had to remember what his why was because he forgot his. He needed to be reminded. He needed to be connected with God. He needed to connect with God in a deeply intimate, personal way. So God says, come out of this cave. You're in this cave. I want you to come on. I know you're in the middle of season 18 of 24 because that's all you're doing when you're depressed is you're watching Netflix. Come on out. I know Jack Bauer, he doesn't want to hurt anybody. We heard it before. Come on out. Get out. Stand in front of this mountain. Stand here as I reveal myself to you. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. Now, I've seen the news and I've seen some wind, but I've never seen some wind that tears a mountain in two. I've never seen some wind that rips rocks away from a mountain, but that's what Elijah sees and that's what God does. But look what it says. It says that the Lord was not in the wind. In other words, God tells Elijah he will reveal himself, his full power and majesty and glory as he stands in front of this mountain, and as powerful as that wind was, God did not reveal himself in the wind. This is after the wind. There was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And so as terrifying as the wind was, the ground starts to shake. And you can imagine that Elijah is terrified. And this is only something that God can do. He must be terrified. He must be scared. But the Lord did not reveal himself in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. As if the wind and the ground shaking was not enough. There's fire on the mountain, but the Lord did not reveal himself in the fire. And at this point, Elijah, he's already back in the cave. He didn't hang out outside long enough to even see all this because he didn't need to be outside the mountain to know what was going on and how terrifying it was. So he's back in the cave. But after the fire came a gentle whisper. A gentle whisper. After this catastrophic wind, the mountain being torn open and this earthquake and this fire that overwhelmed Elijah and scared him back into the cave, there was this sound quiet. Almost like a calm after the storm. And God was in this quiet sound. The full presence and majesty and power of God was in the sound. God was in the whisper, and that's what brought him out of the cave. That's what brought Elijah out of the cave. It was the whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he put his cloak over his face. And he went and stood out at the mouth of the cave. So Elijah's coming back out of the cave. He covers his face out of awe and respect, because he realizes that quiet voice held the majesty and the glory and the power and the magnificence and the holiness of God. And he felt compelled to hide his face. Now, when you read this, and you realize that it was the whisper that brought Elijah out of the cave, that the full power and majesty of God's presence was in the whisper, you wonder why God just couldn't use the big, powerful signs to reveal himself. Why didn't he just show himself, his full nature, in the wind? Why not in the earthquake? And why not in the fire? And because that's something we can identify with. You know, we say, God, I want a sign, and we want it to be big. Explosions, mountain getting torn open, earthquake, fire. I think maybe that's what Elijah was expecting. And that's what we would want too. Especially when we're in that same spot as Elijah. We want God to reveal himself in big ways. God, tell me why I'm hurting. God, I'm going to need a sign from you, God. Tell me why I'm hurting. Give me some clue about what I'm supposed to do with my job. God, if you're real, take this problem from me. Can you show it to me at least? I want to see it. I want to hear something loud. I want to experience you, God, something big and powerful and clear, so I know that it's you. And God does this sometimes, right? He'll do this. Sometimes we're in church, we're in a worship service, and we're saying, man, God was in that song. You see a line on the screen, and you're like, man, that's talking right about what I'm going through this week. Right there. Sometimes you hear a message, right? Like I listen to sermons, I listen to podcasts. I'm sometimes like, man, that's God. He's talking right to me. Sometimes you come here and people pray over you, people give you an encouraging word, and you say, that's heaven coming down. I heard God loud and clear, that was just for me. Sometimes you see baptisms. Sometimes you see a child dedication. Last week, 19 kids up here. That was crazy. I thought there was going to be 3. God was in that. Sometimes we hear it loud and clear. But sometimes we don't see big signs, right? God isn't speaking to us loudly. We don't have some clear indication or sense of his presence, and that's why it's easy to get discouraged, just like Elijah was. Now, for Elijah, the problem was not a lack of God's presence or his signs. If you look in the Bible, sometimes we think that the Bible is full of miracles. Well, there's a lot of miracles in the Bible, but it's always during a couple periods of history. The early church and during the life of Jesus, and there's sometimes during Moses, and there's sometimes during Elijah. So there's a lot of miracles that happened during the life of Elijah. Bold signs that were undoubtedly from God, no mistake about it. So Elijah didn't need big, bold signs. What Elijah needed was to experience God in a deeper and more intimate way. He didn't need bigger, better signs. He didn't need tornadoes or earthquakes or fires. What he needed was a whisper. A whisper. And here's why. Now, Peter, I don't want you to touch the volume on this microphone, Peter. We good? Where you at, Peter? Yeah. Okay, right there. Don't leave it alone, okay? If I'm shouting or if I'm making myself clear, you don't need to come near, right? You can see what I'm doing and you can see what's happening and you can stay far away. See, Elijah didn't have to come out of the cave to know that God was working on the outside of the cave, did he? Elijah knew what was happening on the mountain because he heard it and he saw it and he experienced it. But when God started to whisper, Elijah had to get closer. Elijah had to come outside the cave because God says, as I whisper, you have to draw closer. You have to come nearer. So this is why God talked to Elijah in a whisper, because it drew Elijah out of the cave. It drew Elijah closer. It drew Elijah nearer. I want you to know me, Elijah, in a way that requires you to draw closer to me, depending on me, needing me. I know you can hear me when I'm far away and you can see signs. But Elijah, that's not what you need. What you need is to come closer. By listening to my whisper, by coming closer, by drawing nearer, by coming closer, by drawing nearer, by coming closer, by drawing nearer. I think a lot of us can identify with this because we are also guilty of distancing ourselves from God when we are in that broken season. And we do that because we don't sense him or feel him. But what if we don't sense him or feel him because he wants us to lean in and hear the whisper? Because it's in the whisper when we get nice and close, when we cut out the noise and the distractions and the background and the busyness, and we start relying on him. We start to trust him more. And he shows us and he tells us in that whisper that the big sign that we've been looking for, the new job or the new man or the new degree or the illness or the sickness to go away, wasn't really what we needed to make the pain or the frustration or the anxiety or the hurt to go away. What we needed was more whisper. More of his presence every single day. More of us believing in him and trusting him, because that's what Elijah needed. And God revealed himself in that whisper, in that quiet voice, and he told Elijah what he wanted him to do next. He says, Elijah, I'm not done with you. You don't have permission to stop. I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to elevate you. I need you to do more because I'm going to start a revival with you. I'm not accepting your resignation. Let's go. You're not going to quit. You're going to move forward. He says in a promise to Elijah, yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel. All those knees have not bowed down to Baal. All those mouths have not kissed him. He's saying, you are not alone. There's many who have not given into idol worship. There's many who still love me. There's 7,000 others who've not turned their back on me. 7,000 others who will help you to restore this place. 7,000 others who I will use to accomplish your mission and your calling in my name and make this nation great again. And that's what Elijah wanted. He wanted to know that he wasn't alone. He wanted to know that he wasn't wasting his life. He wanted to know that his passion to see the world change for God was not going to be squandered. And God was going to give him all this. He was going to give him all this, and he was going to use Elijah for revival, but Elijah wouldn't have known if he hadn't followed the whisper. Elijah wouldn't have known unless he was in that place of feeling broken and hopeless and lost. And that was the place he heard the whisper. So what does this mean for all of us? First of all, it means that we have to seek God in quiet places. This, for me, is like one of the most difficult things that I know. It's hard because it requires walking away from distraction, and I am a walking, living distraction. I have distractions all around me, kids, and I'm always connected to everything, like just everything. Hold up. Anyhow, so computer and phone and TV and sports, I'm so connected to everything, and most of us are the same way. So getting away from distractions is incredibly difficult because it takes routine. It takes self-discipline, it takes patience, it takes honesty, but it is critical. You know how I feel about showing up here, and how you hear me talk about all the time how when we come here, you're blessed and I'm blessed, right? Like we're blessed together because of this place. But just showing up here, even if it's every single week, and volunteering on teams and going to discover groups and all that great stuff, that doesn't mean anything. And it doesn't help you gain intimacy with God. It's a start. Like we gotta start there. But intimacy with God is something that you have to do on your own. It's something that you are responsible for, not me, not these guys. It's something that you are responsible for. And so you have to be consistent every week or a few times a week or every day if possible by getting yourself reading and praying and seeking after God. Seeking after intimacy with God. And so we have to start building these habits into our life. And people have these mantras that say no Bible, no breakfast, or no study, no Netflix, or no. I have to have prayer before I'm with people. Whatever mantra or routine, you have to put it in your life because it's worth it and it's critical because it's intimacy with God that reveals the presence and purpose of God. It's intimacy with God that reveals the presence and purpose of God. Many people will go their entire lives without understanding God's purpose for their lives, and this is a tragedy. It's a tragedy. God created every single one of us in eternity past for a purpose. And it's available for us to know, and it's when we draw close to him that he's going to reveal it to us. We were made for more than just showing up on Sundays or posting Bible verses on Facebook. We're made for more than pouring our lives into our work or our family or our hobby. In fact, the power of the whisper lives inside of you. And we're going to talk about this over the next few weeks. The power of the whisper lives inside of us and is calling out to be used so it can transform the world around you. And you'll know this power if you get quiet and listen. When you get quiet and listen, you seek him out and you say, I want to hear you, God. No matter what you have to say. Have you tried this before? It's terrifying. I want to hear you, God. I want to hear you. No matter what you have to say to me, no matter how hard it is for me to hear, no matter what you are asking me to change or how you are challenging me or how you're asking me to move or step forward, I want to hear you. And this is where we find intimacy with God. This is where he's going to reveal his presence. This is where you're going to hear that resounding call of purpose and mission. And finally, I love this idea that God is never silent. Sometimes we say, God, you're silent. I can't hear you, God. God, you're not around. God, you've abandoned me. God, what's happened to you? God is never silent, even in the quiet. I love the Hebrew translation of the word whisper. It's actually 3 words. And some Bibles will translate it still, quiet voice. This doesn't do justice to what the author's trying to convey. Because when you read the original language in its most literal form, what it should say is the sound of a silent voice. Now this seems contradictory because how could a voice be silent, right? Like you can hear me talking. Even when I had the microphone down here, you can still hear me talking. How can we hear a silent voice? But remember, sometimes sound is silent to our ears or our perception, but it still makes a noise, right? There's this frequency at which a human ear can discern sound, but there's much lower frequencies or much more quiet frequencies that we can't hear. Sometimes what is imperceivable to our ears is felt in our heart. And what we hear in the quiet will most often be something that communicates to us in a way that only our hearts can understand. It's like that feeling that you have when you have first love. You remember that feeling? Like you didn't even need to say it, and you didn't even need to hear it, but you knew it was present, right? Or it's like when you hold that baby, or even, when you hold that puppy, like even if they can't understand you, that you love them. Even if there's no words, you can perceive the voice. So what this means, even in our busyness, and even in our feeling worn out, even in your depression, even in when you're feeling like you can't get on track, even when you don't see him or hear him or feel him, he's saying to you, speaking in your pain, speaking over your guilt, speaking over your anguish, speaking over your fear, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. Never, 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 never. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. Now come closer. Come on. Listen as I breathe into your life. Listen as I reveal myself to you. Listen as I give you more. Listen. Listen. As I whisper. Let's stand and pray together. God, there are some in this place who need to hear you in a loud, resounding, bold voice full of signs and wonders. And God, if that's what it's going to take to lead a heart to your grace and love, my God, I ask you in this moment for that sound, for that sign, for that presence of your Holy Spirit to fall on this place and fall on this heart. But God, I know that there are others here. And they've known you. They've had a relationship, and God, they've been working, and they've been serving, and they've been faithful, and they've seen the signs. They've seen your boldness. They've seen you work in ways that are unmistakably you. But God, we know what they need in this moment, on this day, is to listen to your quiet voice, to that whisper. Draw near to you so you can speak to them in a way that only they can hear, with the heart that you've created. Open our hearts, God. Speak to us. Help us to be courageous and faithful. It's in Jesus' name, amen.